Hi there guys. In this episode update, we have gone from lots of plastic parts to three very definite complete sub-assemblies, that being the engine frame and suspension ancillaries, and the rear wheel assembly and the front wheel assembly on the swing arms respectively, and then the bodywork separately, which is in its separate panels of tank and seat unit, side panels and front upper cowling. It's one of those weird things with motorbike kits where you hit that sort of limbo spot, as I mentioned in my last video, where you don't seem to be getting anywhere fast, and then all of a sudden you're assembling a whole load of stuff at once. And as with a lot of motorbike kits, once you're past the small part painting stage, a lot of the assembly is either sort of push fit or screws together, and this is no particular exception. The exhaust, for example, is fitted up but not glued, and it's just hooked into the hangers. It's a good solid fit on its own. The engine is screwed to the aluminium frame on either side, and then the tubular steel frame is clipped into place onto the aluminium frame, onto little pegs on the frame, so that's not glued. And then we've got the handlebar assembly up here, and then extra little bits and pieces, the rear suspension that you can see up here, the front suspension that you can see along here, and the radiator and some of the pipe work for the adjustable suspension. As you would see coming down from here, this is where your adjuster would be to adjust your preload on your shock absorber, and the one for the rear is on the opposite rail. Now these are actually invisible once the bodywork is on, it covers them, but it's kind of nice to know it's there and the details there, and I will show this without the bodywork when it's finally done. So I'll have a reveal showing it without the bodywork and then with all the bodywork fitted. We'll have a look at the right hand side of that, at some of the detail, and you can see on here, in fact I'll actually show you from the top. It's going to be a little tricky to see, but hopefully you'll be able to see down here. And I'm going to show you how the steering works. So what you have is the handlebars are conventional and just turn in a yoke, and then they're connected to, try and get that in focus for you, they're connected to this little fella under here with a bar which goes to, I don't know, this is the bit you might not be able to see easily, but as I turn those you'll see that goes to a pivot. Now this is a bar that runs from one side of the aluminium frame to the other, like so. And what that does when you turn it is it turns this here forward and back. This in turn pushes or pulls another bar, the same as the one that's connected to the handlebars, but this other bar is part of the front wheel assembly on the right hand side. And just get swing the torsion bars up out of the way so they're not interrupting, and it's this one here, and that pushes and pulls, turning the wheel left or right accordingly. But you can see we've got the engine detail, including the little oil window and the blue banjo bolts for the oil cooler connections, and I did the oil filter in white just to make that stand out a little rather than black, because the whole engine is pretty much satin black. Now this needed a lot of handling during the assembly stage, and because of that a lot of the high spots got wear from being handled, and the paint got worn away, and it meant that that various bits of the engine casing had to be retouched up. The point I'm making here is, if you're looking for a motorbike kit to start with, I can say with some certainty, having built a few Tamiya kits, that this is not the one that you want to be starting with. There are a lot of very, very fiddly little bits and pieces, and it will frustrate you and it will try your patience. So this is not the ideal starter kit. So start with something a bit easier. So that's the main body that you can see there. Then down here we've got the rear swing arm, drive chain, and hugger, disc brake, and disc brake caliper and hose fitted, ready for popping into the frame. And this will be then routed to the rear master cylinder. That's a fairly straightforward assembly. You do have to be careful with this torsion brake caliper torsion bar arm. I've snapped that 2 or 3 times and had to re-glue it, so be careful with that. It's quite fragile, and obviously with it being quite long and swinging about, it's as you can imagine, it is a little fragile and prone to being broken. So the tyres have been sanded slightly just to take the centre wear line off and make them look a little bit more realistic. And as I say, there's still a little bit of shine on the aluminium, which I'm quite pleased with. And the chains had a little bit of weathering just to bring out the detail. So it's not filthy, but it's just got that general bit of dirt look about it. Then the front assembly that you can see here, this is the right hand side, which the torsion bar arm has actually just popped off, so apologies for that. But that bit just fits onto the hub like so and fastens on with a screw. This one is the metal one, and this is the steering arm, and as you can see it pivots there like so. I'll try and explain how this works. Basically what you've got is a large central hub with a slot in, which allows the swing arm to pivot like so for the steering. So it turns like so in the swing arm, and you'll notice it's not straight that way. It's actually at a bit of a slant, which gives it that necessary little bit of a cant as it turns left to right. And on the real thing, this would then have a large bearing around the outer race of that the wheel spins in, and the brake discs of course are attached to the wheel, so that would spin inside on that large bearing while the central portion of it remained stationary. And then that has a T-piece which with a pivot point for it to turn, and then it's connected to both sides of the swing arm that you can see there. So hopefully that makes sense. It's very, very tricky to explain that one. So that's the front bit, and that's the left hand side, which is exactly the same with the exception of the steering componentry is only on the right hand side. So you've got a steering bar on the right hand side and only the torsion bar on the left hand side. And there's a torsion bar on the right hand side as well, of course. But that's the front assembly, and what we then have are the main body shell with the rear light assembly glued in place and the number plate. The front upper portion, which has the headlight and indicator lights and the windshield, and then of course, whoops, the side panels, one of which I've just dropped on the floor, so I'll just show you the one rather than knock the camera trying to retrieve that. And then the side panels that you can see here, which will obviously complete the model. In addition to that, there's just a couple of little bits and pieces, the sort of dashboard, the clock which fits into the front upper part of the fairing, the brake and clutch fluid master cylinder reservoirs, and the foot pegs, front left and right foot pegs, the stand, the side stand, and the gear change mechanism which the foot peg fits through. So all those little bits have now been assembled and are pretty much as you can see, there's not much left to go now, so I'll be going on with with completing the assembly and then show you the completed model. One thing I will mention, just looking at this, you'll notice the seat and the pad. What I've done is I've painted those in Tamiya rubber black, X85 or 86 I think, it's rubber black. And then it's had a couple of coats of that and then a coat of clear over the top. In retrospect, I should have probably used NATO black, which is a slightly greyer colour, which I tend to use for, that's what I tend to use for coolant pipe hoses. And because I find it looks a bit more realistic, whereas the rubber black is good for things like hoods, like you'll have seen on BMW Z1 build. I chose to paint this rather than use the seat pad material because this is the seat pad material, and I chose not to use this because, as you can see, it's cracked and it's absolutely useless. And not only that, it's actually degraded and is falling apart, so trying to stick that on would have just made a real mess. I did toy with the idea of using some cloth-like material, but cutting that, shaping it, fitting it would have probably been a real pain as well. The other thing I guess to mention are just a couple of little points. On the rubber sections of the hoses, I made some clamps out of thick foil, like your wine bottle type foil, and I usually keep a couple of pieces of that in a spares box. They come in handy for all sorts, seat belts and all sorts of things. They are a little thick, but I still think they look okay. And that's pretty much it really. It does need a couple of little areas of touch up of paint here and there where, as I say, it's due to handling, it's worn, but on the whole that's not bad. And all that's left now is fit the rear and front swing arms and then the bodywork. So that's where we're at the moment. So join us for the next video, which hopefully won't be too long, which will show the completed kit. Thank you for watching.